I was dead for 3 minutes. 3 minutes of suffocating darkness. 3 minutes of terror, pain, and truth. 3 minutes that shattered everything I had ever believed. My name is Harrison Reed, and before I take my last breath, I must tell you the truth. I spent my life believing I was chosen, that my people were superior, that I was defending God's will. I grew up in a world where hatred was not just accepted, it was praised. My father was a preacher, a leader, a man of faith, and the men who sat in his church were not just followers. They were judges, lawmen, businessmen, the architects of a system built on oppression. I was raised to believe that black people were cursed, that segregation was divine law, that white men were appointed rulers by God himself. And I believed it. I didn't just believe it, I lived it, preached it, enforced it. I spent decades spreading these lies, justifying them with scripture, wearing them like armor. But then one night everything changed. April 15, 2004. A regular Thursday. I was driving home from a gathering, gripping the wheel as I listened to angry voices on the radio. My chest felt tight, but I ignored it. Then, without warning, pain exploded inside me, sharp, crushing, relentless. My vision blurred, my breath caught, and my hands slipped from the wheel. The last thing I remember was the screech of tires, the crunch of metal, and then, nothing. And then I woke up. But I wasn't in my truck. I wasn't in a hospital. I was somewhere else. It was dark. Not just dark, alive, The darkness had weight, like a presence wrapping around me, suffocating me. I tried to move, to breathe, to call out, but I had no body. I was nothing but a consciousness floating in a void. And then I heard them. The screams. Thousands of voices. Millions. Crying, wailing, begging. It was not just pain, it was regret. The kind that burrows into your soul, that never ends. And then a voice, his voice, cut through the darkness. Harrison. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. But it was powerful, so powerful it unraveled me from the inside out. And then the darkness shattered. A light tore through it, burning, consuming. And I saw him. Jesus. Not the pale, blue-eyed figure I had grown up with. Not the painted man from the churches I sat in. No, this was the real Jesus. Glorious. Radiant. Terrifying in his holiness. And the moment I looked into his eyes, I knew. I had been wrong. All my life I had been wrong. I was raised in the heart of Montgomery, Alabama, in a home where faith and fear walked hand in hand. My father's voice was the first thing I learned to obey. His sermons weren't just lessons about God, they were declarations of power, commands that defined the world I was expected to live in. And in that world there was no room for questioning. I remember sitting in the front pew as a boy, watching my father grip the heavy Bible in his hands, his voice booming through the church. He would read scripture with unwavering conviction, weaving together faith and politics, righteousness and dominance. The curse of Canaan, he thundered one Sunday morning, eyes sweeping over the congregation. Black men were destined to serve. This is the will of God. The men in the pews nodded, their faces hard with approval. My father wasn't just preaching. He was shaping minds, forging the iron bars of belief that would hold us captive for generations. I believed it all. I absorbed it like scripture, like law, like an undeniable truth etched into the marrow of my bones. The world was simple, us and them and I knew which side I was on. By the time I was 12, I had seen more hatred disguised as righteousness than most men do in a lifetime. I had walked through fields where crosses burned like beacons, where men in white robes whispered prayers that were really curses. I had seen the fear in the eyes of black families as they packed their belongings in the dead of night, fleeing from unspoken threats that hovered like a storm over their homes. I felt powerful. I felt chosen. But power built on lies is a fragile thing. And one day, even the strongest fortress crumbles. Years passed, and I grew into the man they had shaped me to be. I took my place among them, reciting the same words, believing the same justifications. But something had begun to fester inside me, a hollow space, a weight pressing against my chest in moments of silence. I ignored it. I filled it with anger, with conviction, with the voices of the men who had come before me. But doubt is like a crack in the foundation, small at first but relentless. It grows, spreads, until the whole structure is on the verge of collapse. I would not acknowledge it, not even to myself. Because if I did, if I let myself question even one thing, the entire belief system I had built my life upon would unravel. I wasn't ready for that. So I pressed on, blind and deaf to the truth that was already screaming inside me. Until the night I died. I spent decades walking a path paved with certainty. I believed that the world had been arranged by God himself, that there was a divine order to things, and that I was on the right side of history. But looking back, I see now that my beliefs were nothing more than a carefully constructed prison, a fortress built from fear, lies, and power disguised as righteousness. Doubt is a slow poison. It doesn't strike like lightning. It seeps in, creeping through the cracks of a rigid mind, whispering questions too dangerous to ask out loud. And for years I fought against it. When the whispers of doubt came, I silenced them with scripture, with anger, with the unwavering certainty that I was part of something bigger, something sacred. But doubt doesn't die. It lingers. It waits. By the time I reached my 50s, I could feel it clawing at the edges of my mind. The world was changing, and the power that once belonged to men like me was slipping. The gatherings that had once been filled with roaring voices and blazing conviction had dimmed to quiet rooms filled with bitter men reminiscing about the past. I saw fear in their eyes, fear of irrelevance, fear of a world that no longer bent to their will. And in that fear I saw my own reflection. Had we really been fighting for righteousness? Or had we simply been fighting to hold on to a power we never deserved? The question haunted me, but I refused to answer it. Because to answer it would mean admitting that my entire life had been built on a foundation of falsehoods. So I pushed it down. I drowned it in anger, in old traditions, in the voices of men who told me that I was right, that I was chosen, that I was a warrior for God's will. And yet, in the silence of the night, when there was no one left to convince but myself, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before. Regret. It was a foreign thing, bitter and cold. And I hated it. But the more I tried to suppress it, the stronger it became. The weight of it pressed against my chest, heavy, unrelenting. Then came the night of my heart attack. One moment, I was gripping the wheel of my truck, listening to an angry voice on the radio talk about how the world was being ruined by people who didn't belong. The next, I was gasping for air, my chest tightening like a vice. Pain shot down my arm, and suddenly, I couldn't see the road in front of me. My hands slipped from the wheel. The truck veered off the highway. The last thing I heard was the sound of metal twisting, breaking, collapsing. And then, nothing. But death was not the end. It was the beginning. The moment my truck crashed, everything went silent. I was expecting pain, the sharp agony of broken bones, the suffocating pressure of crushed metal. Instead, there was nothing. No sound, no breath, no weight of my body. Just absence. Then the darkness came. Not the comforting kind of darkness that comes when you close your eyes at night. This was something else, something alive. It wrapped around me, pressed against me, seeped into me. It was endless, stretching in every direction, consuming everything. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly alone. I tried to move, but I had no body. I tried to speak, but I had no voice. I was nothing. And yet, I was still there, aware, conscious, trapped in an abyss that had no beginning and no end. Then the screams began. At first, they were distant, like echoes carried on the wind. But they grew louder, closer, until they surrounded me. Men, women, children. Millions of voices crying out in agony, pleading, wailing. The sound of endless suffering, of regret so deep it burned through the soul. I knew without knowing how that these were the voices of those who had lived in hate, who had died clinging to their lies, who had refused to see the truth. And now they were trapped, just like me. I wanted to close my ears, to run, to escape. But there was nowhere to go. There was only the darkness and the torment of a truth I had never been willing to face. Then I heard it. A voice. Not like the others. Not screaming, not wailing. It was strong. It was steady. It was powerful enough to shake the very fabric of the abyss itself. Harrison. My name. Spoken not with anger, not with hatred, but with something else. Sorrow. And in that instant, the darkness shattered. A light, blinding, brilliant, more real than anything I had ever known, exploded before me, piercing through the void, swallowing the abyss whole. It was like being set on fire and healed at the same time. I wanted to recoil, to shield myself, but I couldn't. The light reached into me, through me, exposing everything I had ever done, everything I had ever been. And then I saw him. Jesus. Not the soft, passive figure I had seen in paintings. Not the pale, blue-eyed man from my father's church. No, this was the real Jesus. Glorious. Radiant. Power beyond words. Asterisk, asterisk. And the moment I met his gaze, I knew. I had been wrong. Horribly, completely, unforgivably wrong. I could not look away. His eyes bore into me not with anger, not with condemnation, but with something far worse, sorrow. A sorrow so deep, so consuming, that it shattered the last defenses I had built around my heart. In that instant, I saw my life through his eyes. I saw the pain I had caused, the lives I had destroyed, the fear I had justified in the name of righteousness. I saw the faces of men I had beaten, the families I had driven from their homes, the children who had cowered at the sight of me. I had spent my life believing I was chosen, that I was carrying out God's will. But now, standing before Him, I realized the terrible truth. I had been fighting against Him all along. Lord, I tried to speak, but the word barely left my lips before the weight of my sins silenced me. How could I ask for mercy when I had never once shown it? How could I ask for forgiveness when I had never given it? Jesus raised His hand, and suddenly the darkness around us was filled with visions. Not just memories but realities. I felt every ounce of suffering I had inflicted. I felt the bruises form on broken bodies. I felt the terror in the hearts of those who had crossed my path. I lived their pain, their fear, their sorrow. It wasn't just a vision, it was my judgment. I was drowning in the torment I had created, in the weight of every hateful word, every cruel act, every lie I had ever spoken. And then He asked me the question that shattered me to my core. Who did you think I came for? The words echoed through me like thunder, and in that moment I saw the truth. He had come for the ones I had hated, for the ones I had oppressed, for the very people I had spent my life trying to destroy. And yet I had dared to believe I was serving Him? I fell to my knees, sobbing. I had been blind, willfully, dangerously blind. And now there was no escaping the truth. I deserved to be cast into the darkness. I deserved to be among the voices crying out in eternal agony. But instead He reached out His hand. "Harrison, do you want redemption?" I gasped, unable to believe what I was hearing. After everything I had done, after all the evil I had embraced, He was offering me a chance? Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "Yes, Lord." And then everything went white. I awoke with a gasp, my chest rising and falling rapidly, as if I had been drowning and had just broken the surface. My body ached, my limbs felt heavy, and my mind was overwhelmed with the weight of what I had seen. The hospital room around me was blurred, but one thing was clear, I was alive. The first face I saw was a nurse adjusting the 4 in my arm. Her skin was dark, her eyes kind, and her expression unreadable. A lifetime of conditioning told me to look away to avoid her gaze. But I couldn't. I couldn't because for the first time in my life I truly saw her. Not as someone different, not as someone beneath me, but as a human being. And the shame was unbearable. Tears welled up in my eyes. My lips trembled. I wanted to say something, anything. An apology. A confession. A plea for forgiveness. But the words didn't come. She finished her task, gave me a small nod, and turned to leave. But before she did, she hesitated, then looked back at me and said something I would never forget. "You get some rest now, Mr. Reed." So simple. So ordinary. And yet, it felt like the most undeserved kindness I had ever received. I turned my head and wept. The days that followed were a blur of tests, doctors, and the quiet hum of machines. But none of it mattered. How could it? I had died. I had stood before Jesus Christ Himself. I had seen the truth. And now I was back. But why? I didn't deserve this second chance. I didn't deserve mercy. I had spent my life building a legacy of hatred, of pain. And yet He had sent me back. For what? Then I remembered His words, "Tell them the truth." And I knew what I had to do. The first step was the hardest. The moment I was discharged, I drove straight to the warehouse on the outskirts of Birmingham, the meeting place of men who had once been my brothers. The men who had trusted me. The men I had led. The moment I stepped inside, all eyes turned to me. I could feel the suspicion, the tension in the air. I knew why. They had already heard. Hank Willis, the leader of our chapter, took a step forward. He was a man of power, of control. And in his eyes, I saw what I had once been. A man convinced that his hatred was holy. "You're late, Reed," he said, his voice cold. "We were just talking about our next move." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. This was it. There was no turning back. "I'm out." Silence. Then laughter. Low chuckles at first, then growing into something more, a mocking, bitter amusement. But Hank didn't laugh. His expression darkened. "You don't walk away from this, Harrison. You know that." I held his gaze, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I saw the truth, Hank. We were wrong. All of us." A murmur spread through the room. Uncertainty. Anger. Fear. Hank stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Do you know what happens to traitors?" I took a deep breath. "I've already died once. I'm not afraid to do it again." For the first time in my life, I turned my back on them and walked away. The threats came quickly. Anonymous calls. Letters stuffed in my mailbox. Words painted across my door. Race traitor. You'll regret this, asterisk asterisk. But I didn't care. Then came the call I never expected. Mr. Reed? My name is Reverend Samuel Green. I'm a pastor in Atlanta. I think it's time you told your story. I nearly dropped the phone. You know who I am, don't you? Yes, he said. That's why you need to speak. A black pastor, inviting a former Klansman to stand in his church and confess his sins before his congregation. The thought alone made me want to refuse. They had every right to hate me, to reject me, to cast me out. But then I heard Jesus' voice again, tell them the truth. So I agreed. And that Sunday I stood in a church filled with black families, with men and women who had every reason to despise me, and I told them everything. When I finished, I hung my head, prepared for the worst. But then, something I never expected happened. An elderly woman approached me. Her hands were wrinkled, her eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. And then she did the one thing I least deserved. She hugged me. I broke. For a lifetime, I had believed that I was superior, that I was chosen. And yet, here was a woman I had once considered beneath me, offering me the very thing I had never given, asterisk asterisk grace, asterisk asterisk. Now go, she said, her voice soft but firm, and tell the rest of them. And I did. The years have passed, and now I find myself at the end of my road. My body is weak, my breath is short, and my time is running out. The doctors say my heart is failing, but I have already made peace with that. Death no longer holds fear for me. I have seen what waits on the other side. I have looked into the eyes of truth, and now I must leave behind the only thing that matters, asterisk asterisk the message, asterisk asterisk. I do not tell my story for pity. I do not tell it for redemption. That is not mine to claim. I tell it because there are still those walking the path I once did, those who believe that hatred is righteous, that fear is strength, that power is divine. I tell it because I was given a second chance, and now so are you. If you are still trapped in the same chains that once bound me, I ask you this, asterisk asterisk who do you think Jesus came for? Asterisk asterisk. I asked myself that question too late. I lived an entire life believing that I was serving him, that I was defending his kingdom. But when I stood before him, when the veil was torn away, I saw the truth. I had been fighting against him all along. He came for the broken. He came for the oppressed. He came for the very people I had spent my life hating. And in that moment, I realized something that shattered me to my core. I was not the chosen. I was the enemy. Every time I turned my back on the suffering of another, every time I used scripture to justify my cruelty, every time I spread fear in his name, I was driving the nails deeper into his hands. And yet, even after everything, he still offered me mercy. Do you understand what that means? Do you see the weight of that truth? If he could forgive me, a man who had spent a lifetime in darkness, what does that say about his love? What does that say about the grace that is waiting for you? I spent my first life in blindness and my second life trying to make amends. I have told my story in churches, in schools, in homes filled with the very people I once persecuted. And in their faces, I have seen something I do not deserve, compassion. They should have cast me out. They should have turned their backs on me the way I had done to them. But instead, they showed me the face of God in a way I had never understood before. Through love, through grace, through forgiveness, asterisk asterisk. And that is why I am telling you this now. There is still time for you. But time is running out. Not just for me, for all of us. Death is not the end, it is the beginning. And when you stand before him, when all of your excuses and justifications are stripped away, you will see the truth. The only question is, will you see it before it is too late? Turn away from hatred. Turn away from fear. Choose love. Choose truth. Choose him. Asterisk asterisk. I have spent my second life doing what I can to repair the damage I have done. And now, as I take my final breaths, I leave this to you. Tell them the truth. Because one day you will stand where I stood. And in that moment, there will be no more lies to hide behind. Asterisk asterisk only him. Asterisk asterisk. If you have made it this far, I want to thank you. Thank you for listening, for allowing yourself to hear this story, for opening your heart to the truth. It was not easy for me to share, and I know it was not easy for you to hear. But this message is bigger than me. It is bigger than the mistakes of one man. It is about redemption, about truth, about breaking the cycle of hatred before it is too late. If this story has touched you, if it has made you reflect, then I ask you to do one thing: share it. Let others hear. Let others see. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to be part of our community. Subscribe to this channel, give this video a like, and join us as we continue sharing stories that matter. Your support means more than you know. We do this not for gain but because we believe in the power of truth. And together we can spread that truth to those who need it most. Thank you for being here. And remember, the truth will set you free.